Hey guys, come follow me time. We're in Hebrews. Now, Hebrews is broken into 2 weeks, so we get 2 weeks of this awesomeness, and then we're into some of the smaller books. So this is the last, what they call Pauline epistle, so as in accredited to Paul. However, this has actually an unconfirmed author. We don't know if it's Paul or not. It's certainly Paul's teachings, but could have come from various places. But somebody's written it. It could have been, one of the guys he worked with. Maybe, it was Titus. Maybe it was Timothy. It could have been someone else that we don't know the name of. So definitely Paul's teachings. And it's written around 60 to 62 AD. So it fits in that group of epistles that we've been studying. This is specifically written to Jewish members of the church, just to break those traditions they've had for so long that have just become so ingrained that the gospel comes along and to just not quite getting there yet. So this was to them to really confirm, look, what you believe, yes, has validity. However, Jesus Christ and the gospel and him being born and then being crucified and through the atonement has changed that. It's written to those members of the church to persuade them that the law of Moses had been fulfilled. So the law of Moses that they were still practicing, it's been fulfilled. So you don't need to sacrifice animals anymore. Jesus Christ was the ultimate sacrifice. That's just one example. And you'll read these words as you go through Hebrews. So it's been fulfilled by Christ, and that the gospel of Jesus Christ had replaced it. So the gospel that we live now, the same gospel they had then, is what replaced that law of Moses. And remember those things of the Old Testament that we studied, we can apply them to our lives now. However, we have continued revelation, and they were for them, much like, the old tabernacle that got moved around, or the things that they did in the temple then are different to what we do now. We live a higher law. So that's what they're trying to tell them. So Paul in Acts 21:20 found that thousands of Jewish members were still passionately practicing the law of Moses. So they had converted to the gospel, been baptized, said, yes, we believe in Jesus Christ, we believe that is the Messiah, yet they were still practicing the old ways. So some 10 years, there was this conference that they had because Paul discovered that. So this is like 10 years later. That they were practicing still 20 years later. 10 years after that conference that they had, before Acts was written, they had this conference. I don't know where it's actually referenced. I should have written that down. Anyway, they had this conference at Jerusalem and had established that certain ordinances of the law of Moses were necessary for salvation of all. However, the gospel, the group had not accepted this. So this group hasn't accepted it. So yeah, there's parts of the law of Moses that are totally necessary, that we don't need to sacrifice, but there are other things that we do, like hospitality, kindness to others. There's other laws that were contained and are contained in the law of Moses that definitely apply and are part of our modern day gospel. But the entirety of that has been replaced by living the gospel of Jesus Christ. So it clearly teaches to no longer practice the law of Moses. This epistle is built on a carefully worked out style to teach Jesus and his gospel. So what we will see here is a lot of Jesus and a lot of how he comes into our lives, how he works within our lives. These are really great chapters for finding, maybe a better relationship with Christ. These will work really well for you. If you're desiring that relationship with Christ, what we're going to focus on as we study Hebrews is that how to get that better relationship, how to form that, how to embrace that, how to grow that. So look for those kind of things. That's the kind of verses, that's what I'm focusing on anyway. And the Come Follow Me manual does the same thing. And I teach from the Come Follow Me manual and from the scripture. So that's where you're going to hear that. The introduction in the Come Follow Me manual, though, is very good. So I am going to read that for you guys because I really love that. That's briefly the introduction to Hebrews. So I said we've got it in 2 parts. So this week is chapters 1 through 6. Next week we're 7 through, I think it's 13, maybe 14. But they're not particularly long either, which is nice, right? So, excuse me. In the Come Follow Me manual introduction, it does read, each of us has to give up something in order to accept the gospel of Jesus Christ. Even if we're raised in the church, right? We all have to give up something to know Christ better. It's just how it works. Because we live in this fallen world with bad habits or just inappropriate habits or maybe even not the best habits, we've got to give those up. It does say here bad habits, incorrect beliefs, unwholesome associations, or something else. See? Or something else. Because it might be this, or it might be huge, or it might be lots of things. But we all have something that we can forego, let it be, to know Christ, or know Christ better, right? For Gentiles in the early Christian church, conversion often meant abandoning false gods, because there was a lot of them that worship false gods, and still that exist today. And our false gods today aren't necessarily statues in a chapel somewhere. Like, we're not talking, Buddhist temples. Buddhists are lovely people. Do they worship that? They don't worship the statue. They worship a god that has passed on, and that's a effigy of that statue, for example. The gods that are more prevalent, the false gods that are more prevalent in today's world are, dare I say, things like the Kardashians that people worship, where it's all about that kind of stuff. And I'm not blaming them. I'm not downing on them. If you're a fan of them, great for you. But you don't have to own everything that they own, and you don't have to watch every single thing that they do, that kind of stuff. Like, there's some very powerful false gods in the way of worldly things, whereas in this day it was literally going to worship a statue, for example, or a believed god that wasn't there. Anyway, for the Hebrews or Jews, conversion proved to be, if not more difficult, a little more complicated. After all, their cherished beliefs and traditions were rooted in the worship of the true God and the teachings of his prophets. So these are really spiritual people, and they had grown up doing this and had been doing them for hundreds, like thousands of years. So you get it, right? So they're rooted in the true God and the teachings of his prophets, extending back thousands of years. Exactly. Yet the apostles taught that the law of Moses had been fulfilled in Jesus Christ, and that a higher law was now the standard for believers, which is what we live now, a higher law. It's even more to us than it was to the people in the New Testament. What we are, like, the standard that we live and choose to live at because of the knowledge we have and the abilities that we have. Yeah. So would accepting Christianity mean that the Hebrews must give up their earlier beliefs in history? Does it mean they have to give up everything and change completely? So the epistle to the Hebrews sought to help settle such questions by teaching that the law of Moses, the prophets, and the ordinances are all important, however, Jesus Christ is greater. So this is where you get to have that relationship with Christ teaching in there. In fact, all these things point to and testify of Christ as the Son of God and the promised Messiah the Jews had been waiting for. Conversion in those early days and today means making Jesus Christ the center of our worship and our lives. It means holding fast to truth and letting go of that which distracts us from him. For he is the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey him. And that's Hebrews 5:9. So conversion in those days was hard to give up everything, and I think you'll probably know or feel of that from some people these days, that it is incredibly difficult to give up what they were doing. But what they're trying to teach here is that you don't have to give up all the things, because some of those things were good. Some of those teachings, especially the Jewish people that this is written to, their belief in Moses and the law of Moses and the prophets of the Old Testament and the God of the Old Testament and all the miracles and the teachings and the traditions that were there kept them a very faithful, beautiful people. It's just that the law of Jesus Christ and the gospel of Jesus Christ fulfilled that law. That law is done in a neat little basket and gets now encapsulated into the gospel of Jesus Christ, and you grow on it. So you add to that whole thing. That's what Jesus did, and that's what this is teaching. So let's get into it. We're going to start in chapter 1, and I will see you there shortly. But that was a brief introduction. Hope you learned something. Okay, see you soon.